So we just got through 15 or 20 minutes without actually mentioning the word Twitter, which I thought was I'm pretty proud of. But we're going to open it up. So do we have a mic? And what we'd like to do is raise your hand. Jake back here will call on you. And remember, this is being recorded, so it will be on YouTube forever. So just behave in your questions. Yes.
Hi. Should I stand up? I'm Jonathan Stein from Mother Jones Magazine. I thought I'd ask you about your opinion on the way in which the two parties are using new media today. Michael Steele has had some well-publicized stumbles. His plans for his new website have been panned, and his top in-house new media guy, Cyrus Crone, just left the RNC. And on the Democratic side, Organizing for America is just starting to get going. It kind of got a late start, hasn't really made an impact yet. Interested in your thoughts on both sides.
Well, Blue State won't be replying to the RNC's RFP for the website. But you know, like, I guess in some sense it's good if the Republicans start getting their act together and becoming a little bit more bottom-up. I think that you know, the policies that their leaders would advocate for will have to become different if they become more of a mass movement and organization that involves more people. You know, and I think that would move them further away from the very tough right-wing stuff that their leadership currently advocates for. But you know, it's also, again, going back to Obama and why the campaign was successful, is that ethos has to come from the top, and if there's not you know, leadership that really believes in bringing people together in common cause for you know, the issues that you believe in or the direction you want to take the country, you know, at some point, if you're not doing that, it's all sort of smoke and mirrors marketing, and you know, it remains to be seen how the Republicans will sort that out. On the Democratic side, I think it's a huge opportunity. I mean, we have a fantastic team of Jen O'Malley and Mitch Stewart over there at the DNC and Organizing for America, and they're building a team, and there's been some incredible activity. I think Organizing for America, you know, I would sort of dispute the premise of a late start, because it was something that had to come from the grassroots. And so in December and January, there was actually a lot of effort to conduct surveys about what people wanted that next organization to be. And there were thousands of house meetings across the country that were conducted in an organized way to provide feedback and shape that new organization. And so you know, I think that because it's coming from the grassroots, and there's been since then organizing meetings around the economic stimulus plan and whatnot, that there is a sense of real ownership among the grassroots groups and the grassroots supporters owning it. And I think that's you know, both the smart way to do it, but also the necessary way to do it.
Yes, sir.
Simon already took some of my best questions. Let me, since this is a political group and we talk about the Hispanic constituency, what about the internet user as a political constituency in and of itself? A constituency that will want access to information, wants access to the internet. Have you thought about and the way to which that may be down the road a real organizable constituency group with its own set of issues and priorities that is there to be as yet uncaptured by anybody?
I think there's a little bit of that, but I would also, you know, caution organizations and candidates and political advocacy folks to, you know, from focusing too much on that, because at the end of the day, like, I'm going on the internet to do the things that I'm trying to do anyway, that the internet's making it easier for me to do. I'm not going on the internet for the sake of being on the internet. And so it's important not to lose focus on, you know, using the digital space as a way to lower the barrier to entry for what the organization or the cause is actually trying to do. And we saw that on the campaign. You know, myBarackObama.com, the social network, which we prefer to call a mobilization network because it's not about socializing, was not, you know, a place where the, you know, sort of Facebook demographic of our supporters could go play in a sandbox for them. And when you looked at the comparative demographics of it, our site and specifically the active users on our social network looked much more like a cross-section of our base of supporters than like Facebook or MySpace or one of these other social networks. And that was because we treated it as the easiest possible way to get involved. And so the most motivated bit of each of our sort of sectors of support came in and figured out a way to use that. And that meant that people used our website differently than a lot of other websites get used. MyBarackObama.com was a lot less sophisticated in terms of technology. I say this as a guy who owns the company who does the technology, but it's a lot less sophisticated than a Facebook or even MySpace, precisely because we had users who weren't necessarily sophisticated internet users. We had Chris Hughes' organizing team had an extensive network of volunteer and staff support people who were charged with helping people use the site. There were people who were active on the site who this was the first website where they ever had a password for something, and sort of sorting that out. There were people who said that their fathers and grandfathers and grandparents had asked them to set up an email address for them because they read in the newspaper that Barack Obama talks to his supporters on email. And so, we tried to make this the lowest barrier to entry for the stuff that the campaign was trying to do anyway. So, I think it needs to be a balance.
Hal, Jake, back there.
Joe, one of the most impressive accomplishments was building an email list of 13 million people. Can you talk to us a little bit about the mechanics of that, some of the tactics that you used? How much of that was just organic growth, and how much of it was different tools that you used to grow it?
All of it was organic. We didn't purchase lists and just add people to our email list, because the point of having an email list isn't just to say you have a big email list. It's, like the RNC says they have like however big email list, but the point is to actually have a number of relationships with people that they open the message, they actually are interested in what you're saying, and they're willing to do something. And so we tried to make it as easy as possible for supporters to sign up. So that meant, at these big rallies that we had as early, in the campaign as February and March '07, but as late in the campaign as down the home stretch, getting everybody to RSVP online for those so that they get it on the email list. Offline events, whether being held in big ways by our staff or in small ways by grassroots supporters, making sure that they had the sign-up form in a way to enter the data back in an easy way. So making the sort of data collection mechanisms across an organization as easy as possible and sort of required was the way it went in. But also just people coming to the site, making sure that it's very easy to sign up there, online advertising, when as viewed through the prism of list building and not through persuasion, was also a big part of it.
Yeah, Jake, yes.
Hi, I'm Cindy Samuels. I have a kind of temperamental question to ask you. When I worked at iVillage, one of my bosses said to me, "You can't do work like this unless you love America," and I don't mean the flag, I mean the people. I wonder how much of your success was because you guys never looked at the constituency like some other level of people, and whether you think that's transferable. And also, that goes with temperament altogether, and the way that you all work together. That takes more than ambition to do that. It takes a kind of temperament. So how transferable is all of that, is what I'm asking you.
I mean, again, it comes down to the leadership. I mean, Barack Obama as a community organizer can't do anything by himself. He needs to get the people into the room and get them to act together. And that's, a lot of what we did was trying to empower folks, but also just get out of the way and give them the tools to do what they were doing. And to tell their story. We viewed ourselves, part of our mission was to just document what was happening with all these folks taking control of the campaign themselves. And so whether it was on our blog, led by Sam Graham-Felsen, or through the video team led by Kate Albright-Hanna, we spent a lot of time telling that story. A surprisingly small percentage of our YouTube videos in the campaign YouTube account have anything to do with Barack Obama or feature him in any significant way. Same thing with our blog content. And I think that obviously the initial spark of that has to come from the core of the organization, but there are also a lot of things you can do and resources you can spend to keep telling that story over and over again and to project that ethos as much as possible.
Joe, can you?
Yeah, well, it's also, we were lucky that in Chicago we had a lot of people who were willing to quit their much more lucrative jobs and come do this for this guy. So I guess it has to do with the attractiveness of the cause in the first place, but how you structure it and the assignments you give and the prioritization of telling that story and making sure that people are empowered is also a big part of it.
Joe, can you talk a little bit about the video? I don't think, I heard a study recently just about the number of videos that you guys made that were not commercials.
Yep.
Not just the commercials getting reposted. Can you talk a little bit about, looking back on that now, how effective was that? You just talked about how the most popular ones were not the campaign commercials. Just reflect upon that a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. We, at the beginning, thought that there was an opportunity to speak to a different audience than campaigns traditionally speak to. So campaigns think of themselves as producers of content for the press and so that's press releases and media events and conference calls and things like that, research documents, things like that, and then also for the sort of undecided voters with speeches and sort of the earned media piece and whatnot, and the campaign mail and whatnot. But we thought that there was an undervalued audience of the support base and the sort of people who are sort of in already, but can be more in. And be willing to be turned into these advocates and donors, and so we got into the content business in a way that was bigger, that was different than the advertising. Like advertising is necessarily, no matter how good your ads are, is necessarily an interruption of the thing that people are actually want to watch. And so we tried to create content that was in and of itself attractive to watch and would actually be worthy of advertising in it. And so that was our core of the written content that we did for the web and the video side. So. And it went, spoke to, the way we staffed it was to hire journalists to do it. So for the writing side, we stole Sam Graham-Felsen from The Nation magazine, where he was writing features. And he brought an editorial vision, but also a polish and a storytelling to the written content that you don't get from just sort of having your blog be written by somebody who spends most of their time writing, press release style or something else. And so for the video, we hired Kate Albright-Hanna, who I had met on the Dean campaign because she filmed the Dean documentary for CNN and made that. And so she came in January '07 and said, I want to make a documentary about the Obama campaign. And I said, well, no, but how about you come do this inside? And it wound up, after a couple of weeks, she, with the mission to tell the story and create content about what was happening out there, not just to tell the story of Barack Obama on the road, although that was a big part of it, and some of the most popular videos are the primary source, full speech stuff that people are just hungry for the full picture, not through the media filter, but to tell the story over and over again. And she felt, after a while, she said, someone came into my office and said that she felt more free to tell the story of what was happening in the political process and in America inside our unit and the quote-unquote propaganda arm of the campaign than she would at a TV news network and a traditional type of journalism job. And she had more freedom to do that. And so over the course of the campaign, we put up about 2,000 YouTube videos. And there's a very fun little clip from Abby Tatton on CNN in the waning days of the election, just seeming bewildered and a little angry that we were putting out so many YouTube videos that it was difficult to keep up with because we had cameras in different states. We had small new media operations in the States, and we tried to find sort of jack-of-all-trade folks who could work a camera and edit the video and do email and sort of project manage all of what we were providing from Chicago. So we produced a lot of videos that told that story and tried to reflect the two-way nature of the campaign. So even if somebody didn't get to participate in the national canvas that we had in all 50 states, we could show them the video of these boxes being shipped out to like Wyoming and Idaho and places where grassroots supporters were going to get the literature and the lists of doors to knock on, and then to wrap it all up and show what happened afterwards. And that was a key part of the content was really the glue that held the relationships together for both us, the campaign and the supporter, but also validating the relationship between the supporters themselves.
And how big was Kate's staff?
Initially, very, very small, Kate and a couple of others, but over time we grew, and one of the benefits of the general election was just having the space to bring in a lot of very talented volunteers, and thinking of volunteers as more than the, stamp these envelopes for us kind of volunteers, but hey, you're a sick motion graphics designer, we could really use you and like polish up our videos, or documentary type filmmakers around the country who could cover events for us and things like that. So it was a relatively small staff, but we leveraged a lot of high-end volunteers and relationships around the country.
More questions? Jake, what do you got? You got somebody back there?
Hi, my name is Amy Harder. Can you compare and contrast what you think Organizing for America will be like in the next 4 years with that of Obama's campaign, and what kind of activities, how they'll differ with one trying to get somebody elected versus continuing that grassroots support?
I think that the fundamentals of the relationship between Barack Obama and the supporters and between the supporters themselves didn't change on Election Day. Like, Election Day was a milestone, but that was, the entire relationship was formed around this notion of actually making change together. And that's something that, you don't sort of have an election and then it all happens by itself. So I think that people are eager and hungry to be involved, and I think we'll see over time the different innovations in terms of tools, but also tactics and strategy to get people involved. I think, it's not, it's easy, especially after the election's over, to think that the conversation in Washington is the conversation that's happening, but it's not. Like, there's a conversation out there happening, and I think that the opportunity is for these grassroots groups and the supporters out there who are interested and invested in the agenda to continue leading that conversation outside Washington with folks, and I think that's partly why he's traveling, outside DC and whatnot. But those conversations are happening at a local level, and I think they're more effective when it's your neighbor, it's your friend, it's your cousin, it's your family member who's having that conversation about those issues with you. And I think that's helping a lot of folks who perhaps weren't in the campaign or perhaps didn't even vote for Obama to make sense of what's going on now as these issues are coming up.
Yeah, up here, Jake, you want to? Oh, you got it. Hey, Rob.
Yeah, Rob Stein. Joe, thank you for everything you've done. I have a question for both Simon and Joe. Help us understand the complexity of a wired future. Let's imagine that it's 2016 and the right has become as sophisticated as progressives, that Republicans and Democrats are wired up to their eyeballs, and there are literally tens of millions of people who have instantaneous access. So we have ubiquity and instantaneity in our political system. What are the challenges, difficulties, dangers for democracy, for governance, for leadership in that world?
I know, you go first.
I think that if there's some point in the future where, there becomes parity in terms of the technology, the tactics, the techniques, even the ethos of building the organization from the bottom up, that's still good for progressives, because at the end of the day, there's just more people out there who are interested in, everybody having health care and the economy being fixed and a sane foreign policy and all these sort of things than there are for the other side. And so I'm actually, not worried about that. I think, again, as I said before, if they become more bottom up and start building an organization, maybe that's better. Maybe some of their grassroots groups decide to do some, cleanup or get involved in service-oriented things, as our groups have done around inauguration and since then, which is fine. But the reality is that, we've just got to keep our house together and in order, and not think that, I don't think we're, so I think sophisticated might be the wrong word. I don't think we're more sophisticated than Republicans. They're actually a pretty wily bunch. I think that what we managed to do was just to execute the basics and the fundamentals of the campaign, whether it's the fundraising, the organizing, the communications, in a more connected and coherent way. And that speaks to Barack Obama's leadership, it speaks to David Plouffe's leadership, and on all the different departments. And just getting that right, like I think probably in the last two elections, there were more people out there willing to be organized than who got put to work. And so every organization, whether you're Republican or Democrat or nonprofit, if you've got 10 people in the room, what do you ask them to do? And how many of them can your organization actually put to work that day? And I think we put together, we put more of those 10 people to work than the other guys. But I think also the raw numbers in the future, even if they manage to reach how the same techniques to put them to work, our raw numbers are just bigger. And if we keep putting more people to work, we'll keep winning.
Rob, I'll just be brief because it's a huge question, and we've talked about this a lot. And just 2 points. One is that I think it's incredibly healthy for our, as many people in this room know, I've been sort of a big proponent of the blogosphere and the sort of democratization of information from the very beginning. I mean, Joe and I were talking earlier about how many of us were connected originally through Garant's Frankie Ruta, right, who sort of was writing about this a lot in 2003, who introduced many of us to each other. And I hosted Marcos Melitsas de la Costa's first political event that he ever did back in 2003, and I can go through all this. But I think that part of what attracted to me from this from the very beginning was this notion of the barrier to entry in this great debate and discourse that I had been involved in professionally for a long time, that the barrier to entry had been lowered, and everyday people were now going to have the kind of access to this discussion that I had had being first in the elite media, working for ABC News, and then working in the political arena. And I think that genie is out of the bottle. I mean, I think that there is going to be now, I think, a universal expectation of average citizens in the United States that politics will not be distant, but it will be close to them, that they will be able to get to the essence of things. I mean, you can use the term Protestant Reformation, whatever you want. And the journalists, the priests are in the process of getting marginalized, right, if you want to call it. There's some here today. I'm sorry for saying that. But I think the point is that, when my dad wanted to volunteer in the 1992 Clinton campaign, all he could do, sitting in Connecticut, was drive up to New Hampshire, hold a sign on a street corner for 10 hours and freeze his butt off in New Hampshire winter, compared to the way that he was involved in the elections in 2008. It was a totally different thing. I mean, he was really connected, and he knew about obscure house races in faraway parts of the country that he never would have known about through the blogs and through other means. So I think the electorate is much more informed. Whether we're wiser and whether we have greater knowledge is something that I think we're going to find out about this hyper-connected internet age that we live in. The second thing is that this is not just a domestic phenomenon. I mean, I think the thing that makes all of this so interesting is that within some point, 5 to 10 years, an Indian farmer making $2 a day is going to have the same access to information that my child has, who's sitting with his 24-inch screen iMac, at our house, right, through some kind of mobile device we used to call a phone that will be called something else, and that farmer will have a Google-like thing, whether it's Google itself or some other version of Google in a local language, to be able to access all the knowledge of the world. And I think that I am sort of a relentless optimist about this, which is that I think this creates greater openness. It makes it much harder, frankly, for politicians to spin and to lie and to tell untrue things, because there's now millions of people in the war room as opposed to 20, as we had 16 years ago, who are checking facts. And I think that this is a monumentally healthy thing for democracy, because I think debate, discourse, and informed citizenry is a requirement for healthy democracies. And I think we have much more of that. I'm not, for one, bemoaning the passing of traditional media, in the sense, I'm worried, as many are, about this sort of objectivity disappearing, right? I mean, Jill Lawrence is sitting right here as I'm talking about this. But I'm also think that, the media had too much control over the way information was. There was too much, the filter was too small. And I think that was unhealthy too. And I think we're going to find some kind of balance. So I think, Rob, 2016, we should assume from a strategic standpoint that conservatives and Republicans are going to catch up. These are tools. These are not unique to us. And that is now how politics is going to be played out. Their greatest challenge is, as Joe said in the very beginning, is can they go bottom up? Can they actually get closer to the American people in a way that brings them closer to the rest of the American people? I mean, it could be, I think that this was fitting that this happened on the Democratic side first, because in theory, our philosophy is a people-based philosophy that wants everybody at the table. We want to be all in this together. The conservatives don't think that way. They're not an all-in-this-together party, right? They have a top-down, more hierarchical understanding of the world. And I think that's where this culture is going to clash. And they've got a lot to work out. I mean, Michael Steele, that little buzzer in the back of his head, if any of you saw the Saturday Night Live skit, I mean, this is a huge cultural shift that they're going to have to go through, I think, to take advantage of these tools. And certainly, it's hard to see the leadership in front of us in the next few years that will be able to really do that. Certainly, it will happen, though, over time, one would imagine. Other questions? Yes, here. Jake, come on. Did I skip you guys? No. Do you want to?
Sam Bleacher. I have two questions. The first is, did you do any stratifying of your message according to people's contributions or their demographics or ethnic? What did you do internally with your messaging in those regards, or was it just all wide open, everybody saw everything? And the more difficult question, if you are selected to do exactly the same job that you had in 2008, in 2012, how would you do it differently?
The answer to the first part is yes, but based on what people did for us or what they responded to or what they liked, we tried to give them more of that and walk them up the sort of escalator of leadership, actually. If somebody's made a lot of phone calls for us, they would get a contact, to help organize other people to make phone calls. And same thing with donations, based on what what motivated people to donate. They would get different kinds of fundraising. Asked people who never donated would get all kinds of things thrown at the wall to see what would stick. In terms of the next time, it's whoever has that job, it's going to be. It's still a lot to do. We had a list. If we had a list of 100 things we wanted to do with the technology, or to try, or to test, we probably got to do or try 15 of them. And so that's part of the challenge for Organizing for America, but also for whatever the next campaign looks like, to keep going down that list and to add new things to the list. I mean, it wound up being a challenge, less about thinking of new things to try or innovate with, but more about having a really thorough discussion about what were the ones that were worth trying, because of limited resources and a limited amount of time. I don't want to give anybody any ideas on the other side, but things that late in the game we thought were worth trying, and sort of scrambled to do at the end was when we had the idea of a lot of people, both in the primary and in the general, looked up their caucus location or their polling place on our website. And especially through the primaries, it wound up that we actually had the best tool in a lot of states. Like, we sort of out-athleted the Secretary of State in a lot of places for just making it very easy to find your place and the map to it and the times and all the correct information. I don't know if that's me or not. And so a lot of people were doing this, but obviously the majority of them were our supporters. And so towards the end, we actually spent some time getting our GeoTV list built into and tagged into the polling place lookup, so that if you looked up your polling place on our website over the last 4 days before the election, you would get your result and say, here's where you vote and what the times are and the requirements, the legal a couple of blurbs or whatever. But it would also say, here's 5 other people who have the same polling place as you. If you know them, call them and email them and grab them and take them with you. If you don't know them, go knock on their door and make a call. And that was something we got an incredible amount of feedback on in battleground states. And those people were in our GeoTV universe. Same thing for the folks on our email list. Like, if we had your address and you were on our email list, and we knew we could pretty sure know your polling place, we actually sent email to folks saying, don't forget to vote tomorrow. Here's your polling place, and here's 5 people who have the same polling place as you. Do you know them? Can you call them? Do you want to meet them? Take them with you. And that was something that we got a lot of good anecdotal feedback on, because as the time waned in terms of opportunities to volunteer and participate or make phone calls at phone banks and things like that, this was something that was very, very, very modular at the very end of the chain, that was something that they could do on election day if they couldn't do anything else, like go in and or go knock doors or be part of the the polling out operation.
Sam, there are going to be 2 big changes in media, I think. There may be more, because if we were doing this event 4 years ago, which we did a lot of these 4 years ago, we weren't talking about YouTube at this point. We weren't talking about Facebook at this point, which were basically little babies that we didn't really anticipate. And no one was really talking about Twitter 18 months ago. The 2 things we know are going to happen is that there's going to be a huge increase in use of mobile devices of some kind, whatever they're called, and the power of those mobile devices. And then the second thing is that broadcast television, as we know it, essentially won't exist 4 years from now. And that we've hit a tipping point with television. I mean, tipping is, TV viewership is increasing, but the broadcast part of television, the thing that we all grew up with, ABC, NBC, CBS, essentially is not going to exist in 2 years, or 4 years, the way that we know it today, right? They may, NBC is already moving now to this 10 o'clock Jay Leno, every night, sort of eliminating the 10 o'clock slot for creative programming for the first time in 50 years, right? I mean, we're really seeing huge change. And so the dominant medium that many of the people in politics grew up with, television, broadcast television, and the quick stat on this is when I graduated college in 1985, 90% of anybody watching watching a television was watching live broadcast television. Today it's a third, right? And my kids, my 6 and 8-year-old kids, don't understand the difference between live and recorded TV, and virtually nothing that they watch other than sports is actually live. I mean, virtually nothing that they watch. My 8-year-old son is better at using the DVR, controller and recording all of his shows in secret, right? Than we are. And I think that, so I do think that we're going to see really game-changing tool change, this cycle the way that we saw in the last 4 years, 2 that we know about, others that we won't, that we can't anticipate the way that YouTube and Facebook grew up, which makes this thing that Joe was describing earlier is this is a requirement now for all of us who are advocates to constantly be experimenting and testing our relationship with these tools based on our audiences in a way that it wasn't in a much more static media universe in the late 20th century. And so this is a huge management challenge for any nonprofit campaign or anybody who's out advocating, because the velocity of, I would argue, the velocity of change is going to continue to increase and not stay static in the next 4 years, even though the last 4 years were game-changing in the velocity. Let's take two more quick ones, Jake. We've got, yeah.
Thank you.
Jake.
I'm Eleanor LeCain, and Joe, I want to thank you so much for creating ways for citizens to get more involved. I mean, you're one of the key people to help save democracy in America, so thank you for that.
Can I get a recording of that?
It's some of your family may have just seen that.
I wanted to follow up on an excellent question that Simon asked, that now that you all in the Obama campaign have reinvented how campaigning and politics is done, how is that new media going to transform and reinvent the way governing is done? I work at a group called New Way USA, and we've gone on a treasure hunt looking for the best of what's working all across the country. And we've found solutions on education, the best high schools, solutions in crime and public safety. These solutions are out there on a community basis, but they're living as isolated models of what's possible. And one community doesn't know what the other community next door is doing that's been very effective. So I'm wondering how the new media can take those solutions, maybe ask people in the communities, what's working in your community for your schools, your public safety, and then get that information into the government so it affects and shapes where government funding goes, so the government can be funding the best of what's working, and also sharing that information more widely, so even if the government doesn't have the money to help support those programs in other communities, at least the government can play a role in making sure that mayors and city councilors and governors and state legislators and citizens know about the best of what's working in the different fields. Because I think we could save billions of dollars and improve the quality of life for millions of people just by building on what works. So I'm wondering, do you know, is something like this in the plans for the Obama administration, and who can I talk to about advancing this notion?
Macon Phillips, he's the White House new media director. I think one of the most interesting challenges for Macon and the White House team is not just what can they execute their own selves in terms of whether it's recovery.gov or the projects that are emanating from the White House, but also to sort of act as a convener of all the people who are doing this stuff at the federal, state, and local level to share best practices and connect with each other and just sort of get folks talking about the different projects and things like that. I just actually came back from a conference where folks from different governments in Latin America were actually comparing notes on the different digital initiatives and schemes that they've created to help with governance. And so the more collaboration and integration I think is the better. And I think there's some efforts that are happening through organizations outside of government to help bring people together and talk about and document those best things. But also within government, that there are a lot of folks who are making connections across departments and agencies and levels of government for the first time now.
We got one last question here.
Hunter Whitney, great presentation. What is the process in Twitter? I'll mention Twitter and Facebook. It's a fire hose of information, basically. And I dip my spoon in there or take my straw in there, but there's a tremendous amount of information that's coming from the grassroots and only increasing. So what is the process for managing that and actually doing useful things with that and funneling it to the right places? And what's the process for taking this massive amount of information and getting it to the right places in the right way?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. We had a lot of help from volunteers, and the network spent a lot of time. I think one of the best things about networks and open networks is that things rise to the top, and giving people the tools to help support each other's causes and opinions and ideas when they're happening. And so,
of course, crazy things rise to the top too. I mean, a lot of the biggest things are
sometimes, or not even crazy things, but things that aren't what you necessarily want to be talking about. But organizations face a choice about how to deal with those. And so when the group popped up on MyBo about opposing then Senator Obama's stance on the FISA bill, we didn't try to knock it down or whatever. We engaged with it, and he spent time on the plane actually writing a very thoughtful and authentic note. Saying like, look, we're going to disagree on this one. Here are my reasons. Here's why I think they make sense, and I'm happy to take my lumps on this one. But I'm glad that you're using the system and the campaign's own tools to participate in the conversation. And so, as organizations have to make decisions about how they're going to really engage with both that kind of thing, but also just the general noise. And there are tools that can make it easier. The Change.gov folks used Google Moderator and things like that to sort of structure discussions a little bit, but the main decision is the organization going to be interested or not in what folks have to say.
Joe, any final thoughts before we go?
No, I mean, I think it's been a good conversation, and I hope that people take to heart when they go back to organizations and things like that the interesting opportunity in sort of civic life now, and that there's a lot of energy out there that's looking for a place to go and to be good to put to good use, and that's both with implementing the president's agenda, but also at small little nonprofits and community groups and things like that across the country. Now's the time to sort of get started and try this stuff.
I think there's we've thought a lot about the fact that Barack's perhaps his greatest legacy will be the millions of people who had a much better experience with citizenship over the last couple of years, sort of how you began this whole conversation, that there are now millions of people who may never take an act on behalf of organizing for America or be significantly involved in the Obama campaign 3 years from now, the re-election, but who will end up impacting their local schools or as private citizens, even if they don't go into this full time, doing things from the taste of enlightened citizenship that they got during this campaign and how people coming together at a bottom-up level could really alter history. That is something that's never going to be taken away from millions and millions of Americans. And in many ways, it may be 10, 20, 30 years from now, the thing we look back on, in addition to passing universal health care and restoring broad-based prosperity and fixing the global financial markets and the small things that Barack's trying to do right now, deal with the Middle East and everything else, that one of his great legacies will be is that he created an understanding and an experience with enlightened citizenship and more citizen involvement that is going to enrich our democracy and our civil society for generations to come. Certainly that, Joe, you were instrumental in bringing that about, and I just want to say thanks so much to you today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.